You're describing he has that magic touch.
Sure.
From partnerships from movie theaters to Starbucks. Talk about those.
I think, I think these are all amazing examples, and the way that they've scaled up kind of shows how he built his portfolio. So, for example, the movie theaters, Peter Guber, who I mentioned, he was the chairman of Sony Pictures, and he also ran a theater chain, Lowe's Theaters. And Magic Johnson goes to him and he says, what if I told you there was a place where, there was $1 billion in spending power and people love going to the movies, but they're not serviced? And Peter Guber's like, what country are you talking about? And he's like, 9 miles from here in South LA, the African-American community is not being serviced. And he talks Peter Guber into a 50-50 agreement to build a theater in Baldwin Hills to service the African-American community. And at the time, it was thought to be gang territory, the Bloods and the Crips. This was only a few years after the Watts riots, where South LA was kind of destroyed. And supposedly Magic Johnson then goes to the leaders of the gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, and says, hey, we can't have violence here. If there's even one incident of violence, they're going to shut this theater down. This is going to provide jobs for people in the community. This is going to be such a positive community force. And he gets both sides to agree to call the theater neutral ground. And within a year, that's one of the highest grossing movie theaters in the country. It's still, again, relatively small business. Like I think he did 6 million in sales, ticket sales. But what it allowed him to do was then he invites Howard Schultz, the CEO and founder of Starbucks, to come to his theater. And supposedly, they're watching this Whitney Houston movie in the late 90s. And Howard Schultz sees that this is not just a great business, but a community center. And he agrees to let Magic Johnson. At this time, Starbucks had never had franchisee in the history of their company, and he with Magic Johnson does a 50-50 joint venture partnership to launch 125 Starbucks locations around the country in African American communities, and that became tremendously successful for both of them. And eventually, Magic Johnson sold out of that 50-50 venture for $75 to $100 million. So that made him very rich, and he says and has said that is what legitimized him to other people in big business. Hey, he can do a deal with Starbucks. He can make this a joint venture incredibly successful. I now trust him to invest in other things.
You wrote something that shows how special Magic Johnson is in the business world. I'm going to read it to you now. You wrote, quote, in addition to his name, Johnson brought to each of his deals what he felt was his expertise, reaching African-American customers. How was he able to do that in each of these ventures, specifically the movie theater as well as Starbucks?
It's still an issue today, but I think particularly in the 1990s, there just wasn't a lot of thought given to appealing to the African-American consumer. And Magic Johnson, who, though at this time was living in Beverly Hills, he definitely grew up knowing what these people would want. And so, for example, in his movie theaters, he offered like flavored sodas, which he says increased, the sale of concessions. And at his Starbucks locations, they changed the music from, at this time, classic rock and whatever Starbucks was playing to R&B music, and they sold sweet potato pie instead of scones. Magic Johnson has said many times, like, my people in my community don't know what scones are. So anyway, all those little changes that made his particular businesses feel like home for these people, for the communities that they were in, led to higher per capita sales for the locations and kind of made them popular destinations, as well as the celebrity of Magic Johnson's name, of course, and kind of led to the success that he built really his entire business off of.